Good morning and welcome to Ganesh.tech. In the last episodes, we spoke of how AI is trending or what are the latest trends in AI. We also spoke of how the social media is going to change over this year and what are the coming changes about it. But then when you change a fundamental thing like, get something like AI into the scene, to the extent that AI is a revolution of its own kind. And then there's social media scenery is changing. It is only natural that the regulations governing technology changes. And these regulations require a change for various reasons. They're economic, they're geopolitical, they're country specific, protectionism, deglobalization, the whole works because it affects everything. And what are these happening? What are the trends happening? Uh, for that, I got Vijay over. Uh, well, Vijay, welcome. Morning, and how things there?
Good morning. Things are good. Going into the weekend. Can't complain.
Okay, fine. As you go into the weekend, in the last two episodes, we spoke of trends in AI and we spoke of the trends in social media.
Right.
So, and certain exchanges we had offline triggered a few set of ideas in me that if all this is being done, you need a change in regulations, and regulations will happen because I'm sure no country wants the other country to monopolize this whole scene
Mm-hmm.
because it's got security implications, it's got
Mm-hmm.
economic implications, it's
Mm-hmm.
got social implications.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are the trends which are happening, and what are the things which one should take care or rather look into when you're looking at regulating technology? And
Right.
the technology which I am actually worried about, which needs most regulation, is AI.
Okay. So let me pick at that for a second. Uh, in the past year, 2023, for me, like I said uh, in my first video with you, 2023 was also an emerging trend that at least caught my attention in the year 20. Tech regulations were an emerging trend that caught my attention in the year 2023. And the reason for that is AI has thrown a lot of questions around copyright, patents. Now, if a machine is generating stuff, can you copyright and patent that? So that's the tip of the iceberg. But there are a whole bunch of interesting questions around technology regulations that caught my attention just around AI. But when I started paying more attention to this, and I was paying attention to it throughout the year, I was basically looking for news stories or legal court cases or laws that were getting passed. Something occurred to me, and I started characterizing technology regulations in my mind. And I basically came down to four basic characterizations or characteristics or principles that I can't seem to, escape from when I think about technology regulations. The first one is, like you said just now, it will impact all areas of your life. So you might come up with a regulation around AI, but be rest assured, or regulation around any aspect of tech, but be rest assured that it will impact areas beyond, AI or just technology. So it is far impacting. Second, technology regulations are necessary. Oftentimes, we will hear a lot of people saying that regulations can dampen or slow down progress. Uh, I can give you interesting examples of how that has not happened in the past. I can give you interesting examples of how that has happened in the past. But one thing I will tell you right now is regulations of some kind are unavoidable, and in my opinion they are necessary and important. So we should not try to fight them. We should instead try to understand them and make sure that they adapt to our needs as a society. Third, it is worth acknowledging that technology regulations, like any regulations, can be harmful if you overdo them, or if you apply the wrong set of principles. And this doesn't just apply to regulations. Anything in excess can be harmful. So that apply squarely here as well. So let's not dodge that discussion point. And I just want to call that out. I want to admit technology regulations can be harmful. And then finally, and very interestingly, just in the space of tech regulations, one tech regulation can be in conflict with another. So you might end up passing two pieces of legislation, or you might pass a legislation and you might have a parallel, court case happening within your jurisdiction or your country or your region, whatnot, and they might start conflicting with each other. And we can definitely touch upon examples of that later on. But this is how I would characterize technology regulations, and this is entirely based on, or with the whole AI revolution that has happened. It caught, that then made me focus on tech regulations just over the past year. And this will, like, at least for me, it's an evolving understanding about tech regulations, and I imagine that we have more to learn in this space going forward in 2024 and beyond.
So that means we're going to see a whole bunch of regulations uh, which are consistent or inconsistent with the technologies. That's the way you come across, right?
Yeah, right.
And the- and let me put it. And secondly, they will be guided by respective, in an international scenario, by respective national interests, their culture, the prevailing level of technology in that country, and the depth of usage of these technologies. So it's going to be a complex affair, and so we are in for a interesting period in this time.
We almost certainly are. In fact, not almost. We are in an interesting period, and in for an interesting time in the space. And it's not just that the tech regulations will happen; they are happening. Let me, paint a, collage of existing tech regulations that have come into effect or caught my attention, at least, throughout the world just in the year 2023. And then I'll do something similar for India, because surprisingly, I was following these stories, but surprisingly, they've just kept adding up. And this is just in the past year. So I'm going to just go through a list because I didn't want to miss any of them. They're all
Okay.
interesting. Uh, I hope you can hear me all right.
Yeah, I
Uh,
can.
Perfect. So, lots of tech regulations in the world. Let's start with Australia and Canada. They're in two different corners of the world, but they did something very, very similar. They basically started requiring advertising and search platforms like Google or Facebook to start paying content producers and publishers, basically, all these journalism houses. So every time a search result started showing a newspaper article, or Facebook started showing a newspaper article, countries like Australia and Canada have asked Facebook and Google to compensate the publishers. I thought that was an interesting, two sets of legislation that happened, and it kind of became a big deal, at least in Canada. Uh, so there, Australia and Canada are protecting content publishers. Move over to Japan late in, I think in the middle of last year. Japan did something interesting where they said they wanted to protect AI advancements. So they said copyright does not apply as it pertains to using content, other people's content, in training machine learning models. So there's a huge copyright debate happening all over the world. Like, can I take your content that you wrote and use that to train my Gen AI model? According to Japan, within that jurisdiction, it doesn't matter. Like, there is no copyright claim that you can make, and this has really, really upset a lot of the local Japanese content industry. And Japan is known a lot for its comic book industry. It's a very serious business with a lot of money at stake. So, in contrast to Australia and Canada, Japan is actually, favoring technology progress. Interestingly, Japan also did something else that was interesting. Japan started requiring, and they've been tinkering with some legislation that requires third-party app stores. What do I mean by third-party app store? Today, if you go on your iPhone or your Android phone, typically the only place from where you can go and install an application is what Android offers in the form of Google Play Store, or iOS like Apple offers in the form of App Store, like the Apple App Store. These platforms, iOS and Android, don't let other companies come up and open their own app stores. Interestingly, Japan said no more, and they have passed. I'm not sure whether they've passed it, but they're definitely looking at legislation around third-party app stores, permitting third-party app stores. Let's take a trip down to the EU. The EU is the big one in my mind that has been very, very active around legislations for technology. EU also did something interesting in the space of third-party app stores. They said, at least within the EU region, companies will be permitted to host third-party app stores within technology platforms like operating systems. So uh, companies like Facebook and Microsoft can come and start setting up their own app stores if they chose to, or anyone else. So this opens up interesting business opportunities. EU has also been in the news a lot for the Digital Services Act that they passed. Uh, and this actually opened up a whole interesting drama where Apple was finally forced to comply with a new messaging standard that supersedes the SMS. It's called RCS. Apple was the last real holdout, and the Digital Services Act sort of forced the hand on Apple's part to start supporting this new RCS protocol in end-to-end messaging. Uh, the EU was also responsible for giving us the USB-C charging port in the iPhone 15 models that came out. Without EU regulations, that wouldn't have happened. Even though the EU mandated that it will happen, at least it was required only for the EU region, the manufacturing expenses and the way manufacturing is set up basically made it so such that Apple had to go provide everyone with a USB-C charging port all over the world. They could not do USB-C in only in EU, and what they had, their proprietary technology everywhere else. The EU is also gearing up to pass a new AI act around AI, so that should be interesting. So that is something to look forward to in 2024. If you go a little north of EU to the UK, the UK did something very interesting late in 2023, where they blocked the merger between Figma and Adobe. Figma is a new upstart in the space of design and productivity software, and Adobe is a massive giant in the space. So there was some antitrust scrutiny that the UK led in that merger. The UK also did something interesting earlier last year. They started requiring a lot of the messaging apps to turn off end-to-end encryption. There was a lot of brouhaha around that. Ultimately, they walked back that requirement. But I thought that was another interesting space where a lot of countries and jurisdictions have wanted technology companies to turn off encryption because of it helps security services and your defense forces to operate better from a security standpoint, but then it puts privacy and safety, user safety, at odds with that security requirement. So that, I think, is an interesting contradiction. Courts in multiple countries have at this point suggested that content generated by AI or content generated by something like ChatGPT cannot be copyright protected, nor can it be patent protected. Uh, and towards the end of the year, around copyright law, the New York Times went and sued OpenAI, the creator of ChatGPT, because the New York Times claims that they basically went and took all their content without a license deal. Uh, and that more or less capped for me the regulatory stories around the world. And we can do a similar list in India. But I just want to pause here to take, uh, uh, you know, your temperature here about what you think about all of this.
Yeah, I see many things happening. I mean, these regulations have will open a can of worms. legal can of worms, right? They will do some good, and they're going to do some. They're going to create problems because I see each different country having its own story.
Yeah.
Whether that story will be applicable across countries is a issue. That's
Right.
one part of the story.
Yeah.
And the second thing is with the proliferation of AI, and AI needs big data and a lot of machine learning and a lot of iteration, and more data, the better AI is.
Yeah.
So copyright is going to be a major issue. How the thing is, and then the next issue is what is the output of the AI? What is the sanctity of the output of the AI, and how can that be certified, and how can that be regulated?
Yeah.
Because everyone can get out anything he wants.
Yeah.
With the same input, you can get four different meanings with four different programs.
Yeah.
So how do you regulate that? I think that's the next challenge. And I
Mhm.
think there was some. I remember some talk of this in US because they're also worried because I think maximum content generation or on AI is happening in US.
Mhm.
So they're also worried about this whole story.
Mhm.
Then I see the elephant in the room is the firewall of China.
Mhm.
China, China is a big player in AI. It's a big player in social media, right? Without doubt. But then they're not open to any regulation. We don't know what they're doing, and so that also will have its own impact, right? So I think these are the things which come to my mind, and based on what you've spoken. Uh, so how do we handle this, and especially with respect to India? Because the way I look at it, as it is, data sovereignty is a problem in India. Add to that, I mean, here copyright issue matters very little actually in real world. So much plagiarism takes place, right? And you can't track it. And the sheer volume of players in India, unregulated, creates chaos for itself. It creates chaos even for to. I mean, security is later the story. There is a huge economic angle, and of course, there is a huge security angle. And this security angle is not only individual security; it's also state security. So, how do we go about all this, especially in a country like India?
So since you talk about India, again, it's useful to understand everything that happened in the past year, right? Right. And I'm actually referencing an article that I was reading the other day that did a decent job of capturing all of this. Again, I'm just going to go through a laundry list here. Uh, in India in 2023, there was a 28% GST tax that came about for online gaming. This caused a lot of pain in the on the burgeoning, the newly forming online gaming communities and companies. Online gaming can be a huge economy in its own right. Just ask Japan, just ask India. Sorry, not India, US. So there are real concerns that this might bludgeon some of that from materializing in India. It may or may not. We don't know, but that's a example of how you can go about tech regulation. I thought that was interesting through taxation. Then there was a huge debate around surveillance around the newly passed telecom law in 2023. But that law is a lot more nuanced, and there are many more things than just it's not just about surveillance. uh, I thought that was a huge regulation focused event that happened last year. Then there was the Digital India Act, which actually replaces the 2000 IT Act, that has been governing a lot of issues around technology regulation in India. Uh, People should really go and take a look at that, because that also represents a seismic shift, because we've had something since 2000, almost since the dawn of the internet. Now we are rethinking and redoing all of that. Uh, Earlier in January of 2023, so roughly a year ago, the government got into the business of forcing social media companies to take down fake or false content or imagery, things that you're talking about. So the government has been busy and trying to figure out how to do some of that. Then India also passed the data protection laws, a data protection law, which looks at data sovereignty. Now there are real rules around whether or not data can leave India, what kind of data can leave India. The EU doesn't have similar rules and laws, but they've put so many interesting regulations that companies by themselves are figuring out ways by which EU data remains in the EU. So it's very interesting to see India do something similar as well. India also got into the business of changing its device import rules so that they can, give a leg up to local manufacturing. So that is technology regulation actually affecting manufacturing in a country, in India. Then the RBI, interesting. I did not know about this, but the RBI got tightened the rules and regulations around how di- unsecured loans can be given in online systems. So this was a scrutiny of financial technology companies, or fintech, as they're colloquially known in technology circles. This was interesting. Uh, and then there was a lot of debate and discussion around new rules and laws that might get passed, or I don't know if they've already been passed, around how internet companies ought to compensate telecom companies, because in the internet companies are actually making a lot of money, but it's the telecom companies that are actually providing the physical infrastructure to make the internet happen in India. So much, right? And it is both good to see the government and the regulatory authorities in India participate and think about all of these things. But like you said, India is a complex country. It's a massive country with so many people, so many players. It will always be useful to take a step back and ask good questions about problems. One example that I can throw at you right now is, you asked, how do we go about regulating fake imagery and fake content? I would, and it's a good question to ask. It's a good question to ask even before Gen AI, because there was a lot of fake news and deep fakes and all of that were happening. One thing that I have come around to is, maybe more than worrying about and regulating fake content, we might want to think about how we watermark or earmark or protect actual human generated content. So there might be better financial and capitalistic incentives if you were to watermark, or just as we do trademark and copyrights, it might be useful to register and uh, watermark content produced by a human being. So if you've written an article, it might be useful to have a system that allows you to go and register that piece of article, that piece of text, and say, I indeed wrote this, and you certify that you wrote it. Similarly, with photography, if a human being took a photograph, it might be useful to put watermarking within, like, that are not visible to the naked eye, but you have a digital watermark in that photograph taken by that camera that tells you that this was a real photograph taken by a real human being and not generated by AI. Will these systems be perfect? Not necessarily. Will they have flaws? Yes. But to me, that is an interesting way of going about about a really, really hard problem around technology and technology regulations. But more than that, it's a good example of how we can think outside the box when it comes to really, really hard questions around technology regulations.
Yeah. Now, having said that, you've spoken of government people and state and organizations putting in regulations, court, legal, and all that, and all these affect the common man.
Yeah,
Yeah, it affects you, it affects me, it affects everyone, irrespective of where you stay.
yeah.
So, what do I do with it? How? What are the things I should be aware of that I do to protect, one, first protect my own data, and second, be aware that I don't infringe into others' spaces.
Well, I'll tell you what I do. I'm also a common man. I'm also a common individual. I don't have any great positions of power or influence. I ensure that I'm always using. This is just me personally. I'm not advocating that others also do this, but I ensure that I'm trying to use communication channels that are end to end protected through encryption. Uh, I ensure that all of my cloud backups have redundancies. By that, I mean, I also try to maintain a local hard disk where I have those files just in case my cloud goes away at some point. It gets wiped clean because of some glitch in a server. Uh, I when I'm reading a piece of content, when I'm reading news articles, I try to correlate or corroborate that information from at least 2 to 3 different places to make sure that I'm not a victim of fake news. And I have been a victim of fake news. I have been confused by images that I thought were real but really were not. So it is a really, really challenging time, even for someone who is immersed in technology, who works in technology, to be really, really confused and even targeted uh, by malicious actors in the space of technology. So I just want to say it's not easy, but by doing simple things, by having backups, by maintaining secure channels of communication, by looking at multiple sources and not just trusting the first thing that lands in front of you, are some basic things that I practice almost on a daily basis, and everyone can do that. So yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah, and I also think that it's high time those people who are into this game of in technology, whether you're a content producer or you're a creator or you're a generator of technology, I think it's time that we know what are the rules which are existing in our society, and to some extent, internationally, so that we behave in that, because today we are looking in a seamless world, all connected by a net. And in that, when you're going in into some other space,
Hmm.
are you infringing that space or not?
Yeah.
And secondly, how people can infringe on your space. I think there's a requirement in some form for an individual to be aware of all this. And for that, I think each government is it is necessary for each government to put out some basic things. Like you highlighted, the Indian government has put out 5 6 different regulations,
Right.
but there's not a single umbrella way of my knowing all these exist
Right.
in,
Yeah.
in a simple manner. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. So what are your views on that? And this is the last thing of this episode I want your views on.
I think governments putting out simple clarifying languages, governments putting out a list of rights and responsibilities for citizens, for common citizens, in a language that is as straightforward as the uh, in India we have fundamental rights and fundamental duties. I learned that in school. There were 7 fundamental rights. It isn't a bad idea for governments, not just in India, everywhere in the world, start putting out such public messaging around what are your rights, what you can do to protect yourself, and similarly, what is your responsibility as someone who is not just living in your locality, in your community, but also living on the internet. Uh, and along those lines, maybe I'll just end by saying that, and I know that governments are taking these things seriously, and I know that the Indian government has taken these things seriously, but educating people on how to report concerns that they have in cyberspaces like the internet, reporting crimes that they may have been a victim to on the internet is, I think, massively, massively important. I was a victim. I haven't shared this publicly at all, but I was once a victim of a potential cybercrime where I was almost fooled into giving my hard earned money to someone. And it was only at the 11th step that they like the 11th hour that I realized that, oh no, this is a scam. uh, Scams and frauds will exist, but if we strengthen our systems to report those crimes, we can catch them better. And maybe that should be one of the responsibilities that should come in one of the responsibilities that the government lists for its citizenry. Rights and responsibilities. Let's go back to that. All of us learned it. We should start teaching it in school, and the government can do an excellent job with public messaging. So maybe it should do it.
Oh, fine. Thanks. I think today we covered a lot of ground on regulations of technology. So if technology come, it has to be regulated. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
And if regulations come, it should be known to the public.
Yes.
And it's not only known to the public, it's known has to be known internationally, so that people coming from outside know how to behave here. And it's important for us to know international regulations, because when we go out in a global situation, we know how to behave there.
Yeah.
Right? And as these technologies evolve, as all the social media disruption takes place, we must expect more regulation. And the fear I have is that we might be swamped with regulation, or the regulation itself might swamp itself.
Yeah, like
So
I
we are
said, regulation can be contradictory. You're right.
contradictory. So we have to be pretty clear. And in terms of, this is a public thing, this is my view, which I think the government of India has to take into account, that it has to put certain regulations in place for the safety, security, and sovereignty of the nation. And data sovereignty and internet sovereignty and intelligence sovereignty is part of that story,
Yeah.
right? And I think at this point of time, that's a little weak. And I'm sure those people who are doing this for a living, protecting our uh, data security and our data sovereignty, will take note of this, right? With this, I think we'll end this episode. Thanks a lot for opening a vista of ideas on this, and and to the viewers, thanks a lot for going through this patiently. All these might seem dry, the first 3-4 episodes, but we're going to slowly get into those issues which matter: the safety, security, and defense of India, right? In these new trends and these new technologies. Thank you, morning, and have a great day.